All right, we are back here. We talked some Giants last week. This week we're talking Jet offseason. Joining me today, a great friend of the podcast. He's the host of the Locked On Jets podcast. He also does some Jets coverage throughout the interwebs. John Butchko is back with us. John, how are you?
Great, Mike. Glad to be with you.
Yeah, glad to be with you here too. And obviously, when we last talked last year, we had much higher hopes for the Jets. Things did not go as planned. Obviously, the simplistic explanation is the quarterback tore his Achilles 4 plays in the season, but we who watched this closely know there was a path to salvage things that was not taken here. What was your take on how this season just went so wrong? We ended up back at 7-10 again.
Well, you're right. I think almost any team in the NFL is going to have major issues if their starting quarterback only plays 4 snaps before going down with a season-ending injury. And, as much as you can criticize the Jets for sticking with Zach Wilson as their number 2 quarterback, and I think they deserve some criticism for that on numerous levels, we do need to acknowledge that, the plan, it was to have Aaron Rodgers at quarterback. Now, that said, I think when you look under the hood, this was about more than Aaron Rodgers. The Jets took a lot of gambles when they built this offense. It's really difficult in the NFL when you try and microwave a contender, when you try and just turn your team, you try and build a Super Bowl contender in the course of one offseason, because you don't always have all the players available at your disposal that you need to make yourself a legitimate contender. Jets took a lot of gambles on this offense. It's easy to second guess stuff after it happens, but even in the moment, going into the season with Dwayne Brown, who's at 38, coming off a serious injury, and Mekhi Becton, who essentially missed 2 full seasons, those 2 guys as your starting tackles, and no real viable backup plan, that was an issue. You could have carved out a path where these guys both play well enough to keep you afloat, but both guys were enormous gambles. Betting on one of these guys would have been a tough bet. Needing both of these guys to stay healthy and play well, that was a bit much to ask, and they both were not very good. In fact, the offensive line was awful. You look at the receiver position, and Garrett Wilson's excellent, but after him, and I understand that Alan Lazard is a friend of Aaron Rodgers. I understand Rodgers probably pushed for the Jets to sign him, but look at his career in Green Bay. This was never a guy who was a great option. He's a guy who I remember watching the film from Green Bay after the Jets signed him. He's a bigger receiver, so you don't expect him to be quick. You don't expect him to be sudden. He's not going to be a guy who makes sharp cuts, but he didn't play big. He was never a guy who was great in contested catch situations. He did not have strong hands. He was never overly productive. And usually, like if you have Aaron Rodgers as your quarterback, and you sign a guy from another team, you say, well, he'll be better playing with Aaron Rodgers. You couldn't really say that with Lazard. And it's, again, like I get why they did it. I think part of it was they were trying to seal the deal with Rodgers. But this is, depending on Alan Lazard as your number 2 receiver was not a good idea. Randall Cobb, again, close friend with Aaron Rodgers. That's why he was brought in. But everybody knew he really did not have much to offer. They bring in Mecole Hardman from Kansas City. This is a guy, we talked about Alan Lazard not producing with Aaron Rodgers. Mecole Hardman's a guy that was a fairly pedestrian guy in Kansas City with Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes. The idea that he was going to come to New York and suddenly light it up, I don't know why the Jets would have believed that. So it's undeniable the team would have been better with Aaron Rodgers at quarterback, quite a bit better. But look across the offense. This offense would have had issues even if Rodgers was in the lineup. Would they have going eight games without scoring multiple touchdowns on offense? Probably not. But I don't know that this offense would have been good enough. I'm not totally convinced the Jets are a playoff team, even if Aaron Rodgers is healthy, because there were deficiencies in other parts of the offense the way it was built. And in some ways, I feel like it might be convenient for the Jets that they lost Rodgers as they try and sell the 2024 team, because you can say, oh, our quarterback went down. Well, yeah, I think you have to be a little bit more objective with the way the team struggled on that side of the ball, because Zach Wilson was not good. Tim Boyle was unplayable. Trevor Siemian was shaky. The quarterback's obviously the most important position. Quarterback was the source of a lot of their problems, but there were also a lot of problems that were not related to the quarterback.
Yeah, for sure here. And obviously this is a very big offseason in the NFL in terms of, coach turnover. We already had 8 job openings pop up here. the Jets made a very early call on Christmas Eve to announce that everyone's coming back here, and I thought that was curious. I know Aaron Rodgers had weighed in earlier that week saying he liked the brain trust here, and that played heavily into Woody Johnson's thing here, but how surprising was it that we got this call like with 3 games to go when the Jets were basically in the midst of a massive losing streak?
Yeah, and you know something? It almost completely blew up in their faces because that was released in an exclusive interview Woody Johnson did with the New York Post. It was published the morning the Jets played the Washington Commanders, and they almost blew like a 20-point lead. And they ended up winning the game in the end, but they almost had a horrific loss hours after that published. Look, I'm on record. I think that the Jets probably would have been better off moving on from Joe Douglas and Robert Saleh. I think that Douglas is deficient. We just talked about some of them. He's not done a good job on the offensive side of the ball. I think there are other issues with the way he's managed the team. Saleh, for years, and I understand you can't really win in the NFL without a quarterback, and he has not had a quarterback, and that might be an understatement. But he's made very shaky hires on the offensive side of the ball. I think overall he has a philosophy that you see in a lot of defensive coaches that his mindset is that the defense's job is to win the game, the offense's job is to stay out of the way, and they're very, very conservative. And I think a lot of the conservative play calling we saw from Nathaniel Hackett emanates from Saleh's overall philosophy. I mean, Saleh to me seems like a guy who, you see this a lot, a guy who's a very good coordinator, but maybe not a great head coach. I think his in-game management decisions are shaky. I don't think he really follows some of the modern best practices analytically when we talk about being aggressive, going for it on 4th down. I think, though, part of the problem is that the Jets have built this entire thing around Aaron Rodgers. They have gone out of their way to give, I don't know the extent to which Rodgers is actually demanding this, but I think it's clear, like whether it's direct or not, they're going out of their way to give Aaron Rodgers exactly what he wants. And I think that's one of the reasons they stuck with Saleh and Douglas, because if you get rid of these guys, it's going to be very difficult to tell this job if you're just doing whatever Aaron Rodgers wants. Any GM candidate, any head coach is going to want to come in and do their own thing. And they may it's very possible, in fact, I'd say it's even likely, they'd want Aaron Rodgers to be on the team. But I don't think anybody they'd hire would be willing to delegate. I don't think they'd be willing to show such deference to Rodgers that they're going to do whatever he wants schematically or personnel-wise. And I think that played into it. I think, honestly, another aspect of this is Woody Johnson's the owner, and I don't know how to put this diplomatically. He just doesn't know anything about football. And I think that for Woody Johnson, it's very easy to sell yourself on the idea that, well, we lost Rodgers, otherwise we're a Super Bowl team. We had all the hype. We had Hard Knocks. We had the top story on NFL Network and ESPN every day heading into the season. We must have been a Super Bowl team. And if it wasn't for Rodgers going down, in fact, he even said that he more or less said that in the interview, that he thought that this team was ready to win with Rodgers. And I think he mentioned, that a good quarterback will lift everybody up on offense, as though they don't need to work around their offensive line or receiver group. So I think part of it's just Woody Johnson doesn't really know what he's looking at. And I think Woody Johnson's kind of bought into the idea that the team would have been great with Aaron Rodgers had he not gotten injured. So I think those are the things that played into it. I remember being not so much surprised, because I don't think anything that Jets really do surprises me. I remember looking at that and kind of scratching my head, both at the timing and I think just the overall decision.
Yeah, I'm sorry to go into these two specifically here. Talk about Robert Saleh a bit there, but I want to go deeper here because obviously, we brought him in here as this big rah-rah guy from San Francisco, led a great defense here. He's had some moments, like the win over the Eagles is impressive game planning, but I feel like Saleh as a whole, I feel like he's sort of an average to below average coach who sort of fits the mentality that Woody Johnson has hired pretty much every coach except for Adam Gase, where he brings in a defensive-minded head coach who doesn't want anything to do with the offense and thinks the defense will win football games, which I don't know if it's a philosophical thing from their point of view here. It just seems like that they hired the same coach 5 or 6 times. It's only worked out for them once.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people think you should only hire, or you should skew things towards the offensive side of the ball. I don't know that I necessarily believe that. I mean, DeMeco Ryans is doing pretty good in Houston, and they got a young quarterback too. So I think clearly a coach with from the defensive side of the ball can succeed. Sean McDermott in Buffalo, he was part of the staff where Josh Allen developed. The thing that amazes me with the Jets is that the one thing that sticks out is that during Woody Johnson's tenure, they've only hired one coach who had previous head coaching experience. That was Adam Gase, and so his experience was not very good. And at some point, like I feel like you would think the owner would say, I've been really bad at picking these coaches. Rex had a couple good years, so I don't want to put Rex in that category. But Herm Edwards, his first coach, made the playoffs 3 times in 5 years. But overall, they have not found a coach that lasted. And at some point, wouldn't you think the owner would say, you know what, I'm not really that good at scouting these assistant coaches. Maybe I should just go out, write somebody with credibility at check, somebody with a proven track record, and just bring them in. I mean, that's kind of like what I think. And I think at some point you just have to say, just trying to find the next hot coordinator hasn't worked for us. So, Saleh at the time was a hire that I thought made sense, based on what we knew from him in San Francisco. But you never know how these coordinators are going to work out. Sometimes it works out very well. Sometimes it doesn't. But I think the Jets' next coaching hire, if it doesn't work out with Saleh, they just ought to find somebody who's proven. And yeah, they cost a little bit more money, and sometimes they make demands of you. And that might mean you have to meddle less as an owner. That you don't have say in personnel anymore. And for the Jets, based on the job Woody Johnson's done, that would be a pretty good thing in my view. But I don't know. Like I'd love for it to work out for Robert Saleh. By all accounts, he seems like a really good guy. By all accounts, really impressive football mind. But I'm just not sure he's got what it takes, at least right now, to be a head coach. And some guys fail their first stint and they learn and they're better the second time around. Maybe Saleh can grow. I mean, it's not unheard of that a guy, after 3 years can kind of reassess where he's at and make the changes he needs to make. But right now, I think it's not been great for Robert Saleh.
Yeah, for sure here. And I think one thing that's interesting here also is the Joe Douglas regime, which he's coming in now. This is going to be his 5th year on the job, really 4th year in charge of personnel, because he came in after the 2019 offseason was basically done. And he's had some big hits. The 2022 draft was great. He's won some trades, found DJ Reed for agency, but there have been a lot more misses people want to give credit for. Notably, Zach Wilson, number 2, was a miss, and some of their free agent signings over the years have not been great. So, what do you think about Joe Douglas, the GM? Because he came over from Philly with a huge reputation about, this is the hottest star on the GM circuit. The Jets hit a home run here. They give him 6 years because he inherited an expansion team, and they have had a very bad record throughout his entire tenure.
Yeah, I agree. And, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, when they hired him, everybody was praising it. But, at the time I was thinking this, and I was excited as anybody. But I was thinking, there are 2 types of guys who get universal praise. There are the guys who are really great, and then there are the guys who know which friends to make in the media who will kind of pump up their candidacy. And you never really know which is which. The other thing is, we see this all the time. We see it in the draft with players. We see it with coaches. A guy can be great on paper. A guy can have the perfect resume for a GM on paper, but you never know how they're actually going to do until they step into the big job. Joe Douglas has been better than Mike McCack. I think he's been better than John Idzik. I think prior to last offseason, his plan made a lot of sense, where he had a very steady approach, where he really valued draft picks, and that's really the only way you can win in the NFL. Other sports like the NBA, there are a lot of different ways you can win. You can stockpile assets and build a team through the trade market. You can make yourself a free agent destination. In the NFL, really the only way is to build through the only way to win is to build through the draft. And as you mentioned, Douglas had one of the greatest drafts in franchise history in 2022. They had 4 top 40 picks, and the way Jermaine Johnson played this year, I think you could say it looks like he nailed all 4. But there have been a lot of misses. You mentioned his free agency record is just really bad. He's run free agency, I think, 4 off seasons. I think the only 2 guys you could say have had multiple above average seasons who Douglas signed are Connor McGovern and DJ Reed. A lot of misses, and they've also played into the Jets cap situation. The Jets are not entering this offseason with a lot of cap space, and it's cap space. I think people misunderstand. It's not necessarily bad to have a tight cap, but the team. It's not bad to have a tight cap if you have a roster that's really, really good. The Jets have half a Super Bowl roster. Their defense is excellent. Their defense is Super Bowl worthy. They have a top 5 draft pick level of talent on offense, and that's even with Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall. So you look at the lack of talent on the offensive side of the ball, and you say, they should not be as tight against the salary cap as they are. As you mentioned, there have been some good trades. But the draft record's mixed. There was the excellent 2022 draft. You mentioned Zach Wilson. I'll give you another one. His first draft pick was Mekhi Becton, who he drafted over Tristan Wirfs. And even at the time, I remember thinking that's a swing for the fences because I think everybody knew Wirfs was the safer pick. Like there was a really good chance Wirfs was going to be a solid player in the NFL. Becton, it was kind of up in the air. If he hit, he was really going to hit. If he missed, the floor was much lower. And at the time, Douglas was new, so you give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he knows something that we don't know. Well, I know Becton's been injured, but it's very difficult, even the fact that stayed healthy, to envision that he would have been better than Tristan Wirfs. And this kind of plays into what I think one of the bigger issues with Douglas is. Douglas falls in love with athletic traits. He wants the big guys, he wants the strong guys, he wants guys with great speed. And these are good things, obviously. It's better to be big than small in football. It's better to be fast than slow. But you also need to know how to play your position. Douglas drafts a lot of guys, and even in free agency, he brings in a lot of guys with tremendous attributes. And I think he banks on the coaching staff to be able to coach them up. And it hasn't worked very well so far. And the end result is the Jets have still not had a winning season since he's been here. He's been here since 2019. Now, 2019, as you mentioned, I hired him at the end of the offseason. Okay, fine. That wasn't really his team. 2020, they didn't have a lot of resources that offseason. So, again, you can move past. Even 2021, you could say, okay, that was the first year where he actually had resources to start to build the team. But now we're 2022, 2023. We still haven't seen a winning record. And, I guess the other point that I'd make is that the Jets may have been 7-10, but this was kind of a shaky 7-10. I mean, they beat some really bad teams down the stretch to kind of pump up their record. And, the Jets really, for a stretch this season, were playing as badly as any team in the NFL. And I guess the point I'd make is that if you need Aaron Rodgers just to be a winning team, it says to me the rest of the roster is not good enough.
Yeah, so you get Aaron Rodgers here. Obviously, they didn't get what they wanted out of him last year where they thought, we're going to get him, we're going to go right to the Super Bowl here. He misses the whole year of the injury, tries the miraculous comeback, ends up not happening because the Jets are out of it here. But now he's presumably got a whole offseason to be healthy here. Hopefully they could build the lineup around him better here. Rodgers obviously gives them a higher ceiling quarterback they've had since probably the Brett Favre years. So what do you think the Jets can expect out of Rodgers next year?
Well, I think they're expecting him to be playing at an MVP level. And I'm not sure how realistic that is because, he's 40. He's coming off an Achilles injury. There were some circumstantial signs that even that last year in Green Bay, maybe he was declining a bit. I mean, 2022 was the worst season of his career. Now, there were mitigating factors also. He played much of the season with an injury to his throwing hand, which, if you're a quarterback, that's a pretty big deal. The group around him in Green Bay, wasn't so great that year, although they imported a lot of those guys to the Jets this past season. And this is, I think, one of the dangers for the Jets is that expectations around Rodgers might be too high. And I think Rodgers could still be a good quarterback in this league. He's still smart as ever. I think the arm, we haven't seen him in a year, but based on what we saw last year, 2022 in Green Bay, the arm's still pretty good. He can still make most of the throws he used to make. What's kind of gone away, though, and it's going to decline further because of the injury, because this is just the nature of the injury he suffered. He's not nearly as mobile as he used to be, and that was clear. Even that last season or two in Green Bay, but now coming off an Achilles injury, I mean, for a 40-year-old quarterback, that's pretty much going to confine him to the pocket. So the idea that Aaron Rodgers is going to be at 40 is going to play at the same level he did at 30, I don't know that that's necessarily true. Now, if you build a good offensive line around him and allow him to play from a clean pocket, he's going to tear defenses up. If you give him good receivers who can get open, he'll find them. But I think the danger right now is that the Jets have this mindset and the Jets, this is one of the issues with the Jets, is that they're not always honest with their internal assessments of themselves. They frequently kind of try and talk themselves into being closer than they really are. If you build this offense around Rodgers, you can have a really good team. You can have a really good year. But if you're expecting Rodgers to put the cape on and be Superman next year, you might be a little disappointed.
Yeah, that's true here. And obviously you have some free agency stuff to deal with here. The Jets have a bunch of their own free agents they have to consider here. Obviously some big names on the board here. Both specialists, Greg Zuerlein, Thomas Morstead, the Jets probably look to retain. Ashton Davis had a good year as a free agent. Jordan Whitehead, Mekhi Becton. The Bryce Huff question stands out. Which free agents the Jets look to retain? Who do you think they're actually going to end up keeping?
I mean, to me, re-signing Bryce Huff's the most obvious thing in the world. I just can't get over like how the Jets complicate the simplest things. This is a kid who's 25. He posted 10 sacks when he played less than half the snaps. I don't care what your situation is. This is somebody you should be trying to keep. But I just don't get the feeling they're that interested in keeping him. I don't understand. I know their defensive line's good, but I mean, this is a guy that should be good for the next 3 to 4 years. He should be a premium edge rusher in the next couple of seasons. And it doesn't seem like there's a lot of interest. I mean, I said a year ago that they should try and re-sign him. And that was at a point where he was really playing more of a situational pass rush role. I said during the season they should try and re-sign him. And they just haven't really shown much interest in keeping Huff around. So, I think that the guys they will keep are the two specialists. Greg Zuerlein, Thomas Morstead both had excellent seasons. So I think those are the guys, and they shouldn't be that difficult to re-sign. I think Ashton Davis, one of the things about Ashton Davis is people kind of miss this because he struggled his first couple of years playing safety. While they listed him as a safety, like in the program, he was actually playing, I thought, more of like a linebacker type role. A couple of years ago when he was a starting safety, they had him play the deep middle a lot. This year, they had him playing closer to the line of scrimmage much more frequently, and that seems like a role that suited him better. And that's something like the Jets, when Robert Saleh came in, they like kind of focused on finding safeties and moving them to linebacker. They drafted a couple of guys, Thompson Nasruddin and Jamie Sherwood, who are still on the team, who were college safeties, and they put him at linebacker. They also tried to sign Keon O'Neal, a longtime Falcon, who was also a safety, and put him at linebacker. So I think the Jets coaching staff they like a guy like Davis who's maybe a little bit smaller but brings extra speed to the linebacker position. And even though he's technically like listed as a safety, I kind of view him as more like a number 3 linebacker beside C.J. Mosley and Quincy Williams. And I think that he shouldn't be that difficult to keep around. I can't imagine he's going to get a big contract, and he developed into a nice role player. So I think that those are the guys the Jets will focus on. But man, it's upsetting to me that they don't want to keep Huff, because 10 sacks, 25 years old, less than half the snaps. This is a no-brainer, but they don't want to do it.
Yeah, I don't understand that one, and we'll see if they try and do a tag and trade situation with him. But I think that you mentioned here the cap situation here is that they are tight to the cap. They do have the ability to generate some room here. Like, do you feel like there's anybody you're looking at this is a potential cap casualty or restructure a contract here? How do you think the Jets are going to make more room? Because as the Saints have shown us for years, like, you can play with the cap wherever you want, and you can just keep kicking the can down the road. I feel like it's something they're going to try and do this year.
Yeah, I think they're going to try and load up around Rodgers for what could be his last season. The thing with the Jets is like there aren't that many guys who they can cut to create a lot of cap space, and that's because like they did a lot of kicking the can down the road last season. So the bill's coming due for a lot of guys that they restructured a year ago. I think CJ Uzomah is the obvious guy, but because they restructured his deal a year ago, that's only going to save something like $5-6 million. And there's already been rumors that maybe DJ Reed's a guy that they may look to trade, which would be unfortunate because DJ Reed's an excellent corner. DJ Reed's one of the top number 2 corners in the league. He'd be a number 1 corner for a lot of teams, but the cap situation may just necessitate it. You still have Sauce Gardner at corner if you trade Reed. You still have Michael Carter II in the slot. You're still going to have an above-average corner group. So that might be an area where they go. But I think you'll probably also see a lot of just restructures where you lower the cap hit in the short run and you just push that money to the future, because there aren't a lot of. If you look through the cap situation, I mean, they could cut Laken Tomlinson. To be honest with you, I might do that if I were them, because Laken Tomlinson's been a big disappointment. And I think it would save over $10 million in cap space. I don't think they're going to do that, though. And the other issue with that is that, even if you save $10 million cutting Laken Tomlinson, you need a new left guard. So a lot of that money is going to have to go to replacing him. C.J. Mosley's another guy who would save a decent amount of cap space if they cut or trade him. But I think they view Mosley as one of the leaders of the team, so I don't think they want to do that. So my guess is, we're just going to see more restructures this year. We push more dead money down the line and create cap space to load up as much as they can around Rodgers for 24.
Yeah, obviously the offensive line is the biggest issue they have right now in trying to upgrade the team, the free agency, in the draft here, because obviously Joe Tippmann looks like he's the keeper at center. Elijah Vera Tucker, they seem to think that moving him around was the reason he got hurt so much, so they're probably going to pick a position and stick it for it with him. That's the only 2 guys really count on, because they said Tomlinson's here, but you don't really trust him. Neither tackle's going to be back here. Max Mitchell and Carter Warren haven't shown much here, so if John Butchko is in charge of building a Jet line, how would he do it?
I actually might look at putting Tippmann at guard. So like I told you, I would cut Tomlinson. I thought Tippmann played better at guard than he did at center this year. So I think my two guards might be Pittman and Vera Tucker, and then maybe try and find a center. Maybe you bring back Connor McGovern. Free agency is tough because they're tackles. If we got to a point in the NFL where good tackles not going to hit free agency, the big name out there who you've already heard rumors about is Tyron Smith with Dallas. And look, that's a guy who's been an excellent player through the years, one of the best tackles in the NFL. But he's on the wrong side of 30. He's injured a lot. I'm not saying like it's the exact same thing as Dwayne Brown. He's younger. He's better than Dwayne Brown's ever been. But didn't we just do this already? Didn't we just count on a guy in his 30s who can't stay healthy? Or Brown has been durable for much of his career, but he was coming off an injury this year. I mean, didn't we just try and go with an injured guy who's older at the left tackle position? Trent Brown's another guy in his 30s from New England who I've heard some rumors about. I would try and find a younger guy. There's actually another guy from New England, Michael Wenu, who that might be the guy I focus on. And then maybe in the draft at 10, you hope, I don't know if Joe Alt's going to fall, but there might be a good tackle prospect available at 10. And maybe you fill it that way.
Yeah, it's one option. The other option to consider here is the receiver situation, because obviously they were benching Lazard at the end of the year. He was not very helpful. Cobb is gone. You're looking here who's got behind Garrett Wilson? The Devontae Adams rumors are already swirling. You got the trade for him. There's a lot of free agents here. I think the Jets attack receiver.
Yeah, I think that it depends on who actually hits the market, because the guy I would love is T. Higgins from Cincinnati. I think he'd be a perfect complement to Garrett Wilson. He's already been a really high-end number 2 receiver, working most of his career with Jamar Chase. I think stylistically, a bigger guy. I think he'd be a great fit with Garrett Wilson. Will he hit the market? I don't know. Michael Pittman with the Colts, another guy, conceivably could hit the market or may not. I would like to see the Jets focus on receivers who are in their mid-20s, guys who are in their primes. The Devontae Adams rumors are going to pick up. I don't know if he's the right guy for the Jets, because the first year his cap number is pretty reasonable, but it really grows in year 2 and year 3 of that contract if you trade for it. And, he's getting older, and he's still very good. He'd be far and away the second best receiver the Jets have right now, but his production went down last year. And when your production goes down in your 30s, it's always a red flag. So I'd like to see the Jets focus on getting younger. I think, a guy who could be interesting to me, maybe a buy low candidate, would be a Hollywood Brown from Arizona, who brings a lot of speed to the table. And then, the other spot you could look, that's the other receiver's the other spot you could look at the 10th overall pick. There are a couple of talented guys who maybe fall. Roma Duze from Washington, who's, more of a possession guy, and then Malik Neighbors out of LSU, who's more of a speed guy. Both guys who look like really promising prospects, and you pair them with Garrett Wilson. Suddenly, this receiving group doesn't look so bad.
Yeah, I think the thing that scares you, Adams, too, is you have to trade for him. The Jets already are down a second-round pick because they have to send it to Green Bay to complete the Rodgers trade. And how many picks are you sending out for the future here to bring in a guy who's on the wrong side of 30?
Yeah, absolutely. And they didn't have a third-round pick last year, and it's one of those things that's really small. It doesn't seem like a big deal, but 2-3 years down the line, if you keep giving away day 2 picks and not replacing them, your roster becomes barren, and people are like, wait, why is this roster so shaky? And it's because you gave away all your chances to add premium young talent. So you have to find the balance. I'm not saying you never trade a pick away, but you can't keep having draft classes where you're short on day 2 picks, because day 2 is where the meat of the draft is. That's kind of the best combination where there's still a lot of elite prospects available, and the salary is so low the first couple of years. If you hit on one, you found gold.
Yeah, for sure here. Backup quarterback, where do you think they look? Because obviously, they're going to trade Wilson, probably a day 3 pick here. We've heard Jacoby Brissett. We've heard a couple of other rumors who guys who are familiar with the system here. What do you think they're looking at?
Yeah, I think it'll be a Brissett type guy. I think the Jets organization is always very reactive. So I think that what they'll do is they'll look at this. They say, we went with the young guy last year, didn't work, so now we're going to go find a veteran. I think Jacoby Brissett's one of the best backup quarterbacks in the NFL. The question with him is he's one of those guys who's a low-level starter, high-level backup. So somebody like him there's always going to be some opportunity where team's drafting a rookie quarterback. He's going to be able to go in and be the veteran who competes for the starting job with the rookie. So the question is like whether he'd be willing to take a pure backup job, and not sure what the answer to that is. But I think it's going to be somebody like that. It could be like a high end guy, a bigger name backup, maybe a Gardner Minshew, so somebody along those lines. Because I think the way the Jets are looking at it is the Jets kind of view it as like Rodgers getting injured is what sunk their season last year, and they kind of realized they probably should not have gone with Zach Wilson. And I mean, for me, like the issue with Zach Wilson wasn't as much that like they should have gotten somebody better, because I don't know that any quarterback. I don't think Jacoby Brissett would have had success behind this offensive line with this group of receivers last year. For me, the issue with Zach Wilson was that they said, "Oh, we're putting him on the bench to develop him. We're going to let him sit for a couple of years." Well, if that's the plan, I don't see how you leave him one hit away from taking over as your starting quarterback. That didn't make a lot of sense. But I think the Jets' mindset is we need to find a better backup because Rodgers going down is what sunk the season. So this year we're going to get a veteran.
Yeah, I got two more questions here. Obviously, the big asset here in the draft, number 10 pick, where they got Garrett Wilson a few years ago. Now they have options here. Most likely they're looking receiver or tackle, I would guess here. We don't know right now, if there's a guy they want who's going to slide. Do they consider going up a pick or two? Do they go down a little bit if the guys they want aren't there? Or they see, a bunch of receivers here? What do you think the Jets do at number 10?
My guess is they stay put. I mean, I don't think they can really move up. I mean, part of it's like what I just mentioned, that I don't think that they can afford to trade picks, but also just in a pragmatic standpoint, because they don't have a second round pick, they don't really have a lot of assets they could use to trade, even if they wanted to move up. So, I mean, I wouldn't mind seeing them move down just to pick up an extra pick or two. And here's the other thing that people don't realize. In the NFL, teams are really, really overconfident about their evaluations. And frequently, the best guy at a position is not the first guy off the board. In 2020, Justin Jefferson was the fifth wide receiver off the board. So the NFL got it right. I mean, he was a first-round pick, but 4 receivers went before him. So, sometimes you get a guy who's just as good, if not better, by just trading down a couple of slots. And I think that, generally speaking, people overrate how much better off you are to have pick 10 versus pick 15. Now, you're better off having pick 10, but if you can add, an extra third-round pick, you're usually better off having 15 plus the third-round pick versus just 10. Now, will the Jets see it that way? I mean, Joe Douglas hasn't really been a big trade-down guy. I mean, he's done it a couple times. His first draft, he traded down to the second round when he drafted Denzel Mims. My guess is Jets will just stay at 10, and it's going to be – I mean, if they stay at 10, I can almost guarantee it's going to be either tackle or receiver. And, if it's receiver, I think Odunze and Neighbors are probably the 2 guys who are most likely.
Yeah, obviously, the last question here is obviously we've heard from Douglas, Rodgers, Saleh, basically, next year we have to win or pretty much everybody's gone. I know Woody Johnson, for some stupid reason, will not say playoff mandate, but we all know what the deal is here. How important is next season for this team?
Very important. They invested a lot to get Rodgers. This is the whole plan, as you mentioned. I mean, whether Woody Johnson says it or not, I mean, everybody knows there's a playoff mandate. Joe Douglas will be year 6 for Joe Douglas. They haven't made the playoffs yet. How many GMs survive 6 years of no playoffs? This will be year 4 for Robert Saleh. Mike, you may remember, Tom Coughlin won 2 Super Bowls with the Giants. This is a guy who had 2 Super Bowls worth of equity. He got let go. I mean, I know they phrased it like a mutual party, but in 2015, that was their Giants' 4th straight year of missing the playoffs under Coughlin. 2 Super Bowls couldn't save him. So, I mean, I think a lot's on the line. I think, Robert Saleh and Joe Douglas' jobs are both on the line. I think Woody Johnson gave them a pass because of Rodgers this year. And I think that, the Jets always viewed this as kind of like a 2-year plan. So I think it's all on the line. I think it's playoffs or bust. And if they miss the playoffs, we're probably going to be talking about just GM and coaching search this time next year.
Yeah, and one final point I'll mention here is a note I saw on Twitter. I forget who said it the other day, but it's a very interesting point. It's you look at the top 5 teams in the 2022 draft, just 2 years ago. Jacksonville, Detroit, Houston, the Jets, and the Giants. 4 of those 5 have won a playoff game in that 2 years since. The Jets are going on 13 years without even making the playoffs here, which goes to show you that, the idea that you need 13 years to rebuild is very, very bad and very wrong. So something has not gone right with this franchise. It's just starting to figure out what it is.
Well, I think it's the owner. I mean, the ownership's the only thing that stayed the same. I think, I know Woody Johnson went over. He was the ambassador to the UK for a while, but his brother took over. And at some point, you have to say, we've seen GMs come and leave. We've seen coaches come and leave. We've seen players, They've turned over roster. They've turned the roster over and over. At some point, yes, I'm saying the only thing that's common is the Johnson brothers as owners, and you just hope that they start to learn from some of their mistakes. You're absolutely right. There's no 5-year rebuild in the NFL these days. I mean, you can turn your roster over completely within 2 years. And, for the Jets, it's kind of difficult. I don't know if you could go 13 years. A lot of people would struggle to go 13 years without playoffs, even if they were trying to do it in the NFL. The Jets just found a way to disappoint us all.
Yeah, and next year is very important also because that 2022 class of players here, they're all going to be coming close to the end of their contracts here. And you think if this blows up again, maybe you start getting the rumors of, Sauce wants out or Garrett Wilson wants out, and then the cycle starts all over again.
The guy I'm really worried about is Garrett, just because, you can see, this quarterback play is costing him money. He should be putting up better stats than he is. He's doing his job. He's not getting the ball. Hopefully that's something Rodgers remedies, because with Aaron Rodgers, maybe Garrett Wilson put up better numbers. Maybe he'll be happy. But that's the one that, of all the guys, Garrett Wilson's the one I worry about, because his livelihood, when you go to the market, when you try and get a new contract, they're looking at your stats, and Garrett Wilson's stats are being held down by the infrastructure of this offense. So hopefully that's something Rodgers fixes. But that's the guy I'm really worried about in that group.
Yeah, because right now he's having the Larry Fitzgerald career path. I don't think he's any desire of following that all the way through.
Yeah.
All right, John. Thanks for all the time. Really appreciate it. People want to follow the Locked On Jets podcast. You want some of your Jets coverage. How can they do that?
So Locked On Jets is available where podcasts are found. You can also find us on YouTube. Subscribe, and you'll get new episodes delivered as they're posted. And then you can read my writing at gangreennation.com, which is SB Nation's New York Jets site.
All right, John. Thanks for all the time. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Mike.